Hello, and welcome to the channel. Have you ever pictured a scene like this? Just 30 minutes after my divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse empty-handed. 3 years as the daughter-in-law of a wealthy family, and in the end, I left like a complete stranger. My ex-husband turned his back on me with cold indifference. My ex-sister-in-law laughed with contempt. And my ex-mother-in-law was so euphoric that as she got into her car, she shouted a phrase that would have soured anyone's soul. Finally, that two-faced phony is out of our house. From now on, that $20 million is all ours. Hearing her, I remained silent, not arguing, not explaining a thing. I just stood across the street, watching them laugh and celebrate as if they had just won the most important game of their lives. But exactly 30 minutes after the judge handed down the divorce decree, my ex-mother-in-law's phone rang. She answered, overflowing with joy, thinking it was the bank calling to confirm the wire transfer she was using to buy a new mansion. However, a few seconds later, her face turned deathly pale. The phone trembled in her hand, and in the middle of the parking garage, she let out a scream that froze the entire family in their tracks. What? What do you mean? The $20 million is gone from the account. At that moment, I just watched them from a distance, and for the first time in 3 years as their daughter-in-law, I smiled, because there was a secret they had never known. The $20 million they believed they had in their grasp had never belonged to them in the first place. And the only person with the right to decide what happened to that money was me. That afternoon, the sky over New York City turned a leaden gray. It wasn't raining, but the air was so thick, it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a storm. The courthouse doors swung open and shut, the comings and goings of people incessant. Conversations, the honking of taxicabs, and the echo of hurried footsteps blended into a chaotic symphony. I slowly descended the stone steps of the building. In my hand, I clutched the freshly stamped divorce decree, a single piece of paper that closed the book on a 3-year marriage I once believed would last a lifetime. 3 years ago, I had joined the Harrison family with a heart full of hope. 3 years later, I was leaving with a small suitcase, a few personal documents, and a heart so exhausted it no longer had the strength to even feel pain. I stopped at the bottom of the courthouse steps and took a deep breath. The hot, dry afternoon air hit my face, parching my throat. Behind me, the courthouse door opened again. The familiar click-clack of high heels echoed on the pavement. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. My ex-mother-in-law, Catherine Harrison, a woman whose mere presence for the last 3 years had forced me to remind myself to hold back, to stay quiet, and to swallow every last humiliation. But today, I didn't turn. I stood perfectly still. Seconds later, her voice rang out behind me, sharp, shrill, and dripping with superiority. Finally, it's over. I told you, a woman who can't have children like you was bound to get kicked out of this house sooner or later. A few people nearby turned to stare. I still didn't turn around. She walked up until she was beside me, her expensive, familiar perfume hanging in the air. What are you doing just standing here? Waiting for someone to feel sorry for you? She scoffed. Or are you planning to go back and beg Liam? Slowly, I turned to face her. For 3 years as her daughter-in-law, I had always bowed my head to her. But today, for the first time, I looked her directly in the eye. Her gaze faltered for a second, as if she wasn't used to me showing anything but submission, but a moment later, she was laughing again. What are you looking at? You don't have the right to be my daughter-in-law anymore, and you're still putting on airs. Just then, Liam, my ex-husband, walked out of the courthouse. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, holding his phone, his expression as cold as if what had just happened was a simple administrative task. 3 years ago, I had loved that man so much I thought I could endure anything with him by my side. But 3 years later, I understood that some people, when the love is gone, become more alien than a complete stranger. Liam stopped in front of me, looked at me for a few seconds, and said with total indifference, "Don't come back to the house." A soft laugh escaped my lips. In the 3 years I lived in that mansion, not a single day did I feel like it was my home. "Don't worry," I replied calmly. "I have no intention of returning." Hearing me, my ex-sister-in-law, Madison, who was standing behind them, let out a cackle. "Did you hear that, Mom?" So proud, isn't she? She crossed her arms and looked me up and down. 3 years of eating our food and living in our house. You must have saved up a pretty penny, right? My ex-mother-in-law shot me a look filled with disdain. Did you really think that by marrying into the Harrison family, you'd get a piece of the fortune? She roared with laughter. Just so you know, from the spoon you ate with to the chair you sat on, everything was paid for with this family's money. The second you walked out that door, you were left with nothing. Some people nearby started to whisper, but I remained silent, not retorting, not getting angry, just observing them. My silence emboldened Catherine even more. She turned to Liam and said loudly, "See, son, your mother was right. This type of woman only knows how to play the victim." She cackled. "It's a good thing we divorced quickly. Otherwise, she'd be trying to claim a part of the family's 20 million. At the mention of that figure, several people immediately turned to look, but she didn't care. She was too happy, too satisfied, too certain of her victory. Liam gently tugged her arm. "Mom, that's enough." But she wasn't about to stop. Enough of what? Today, things need to be made crystal clear. She turned to me, her gaze sharp. "Listen to me closely. You've just gotten divorced, which means the entire 20 million from the investment fund now belongs, in its entirety, to the Harrison family." She lifted her chin proudly. "It has nothing to do with you anymore." Hearing her, I just nodded slightly. "Oh, really?" She frowned, probably expecting me to cry or at least react, but I simply said in a soft voice, "Congratulations, Mrs. Harrison." At that, Madison let out a shrill laugh. "Mom, do you see? She's even congratulating us. So polite." My ex-mother-in-law laughed too. "Yes, you should congratulate us." She looked at me with mock pity. "Because from now on, you're going to find out what it's like to live with no money, no husband, and no one to support you." I didn't answer. I just looked at the gleaming black Maybach parked in front of the courthouse. The driver had already opened the door for them. Catherine walked toward it, and as she did, she said loudly to her daughter, "Let's go. I have to stop by the bank today to confirm the wire transfer." Her voice was euphoric. "And then we'll go see that $5 million mansion in the Hamptons that I like so much." Madison gasped. "Really, Mom?" "Of course." She laughed. "With 20 million in the bank, what's buying one mansion?" The three of them got into the car. The door shut with a solid thud. The Maybach pulled away slowly, disappearing from the courthouse. I stood still, watching them go. The afternoon breeze gently stirred my hair. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out. It was a message from the bank. The content was a single line. "The asset protection mechanism has been activated, as per the stipulated clause, following the finalization of the divorce proceedings." I stared at the message for a long time, and then I smiled faintly. Somewhere in the city, probably in just a few minutes, my ex-mother-in-law's phone would also ring, and that call would make the entire Harrison family realize a truth they had never imagined. A truth that for 3 years, I had never revealed. The gleaming black Maybach pulled away from the courthouse, merging with the dense afternoon traffic of Midtown Manhattan. The slanted sun reflected off the car's tinted windows, illuminating Catherine Harrison's radiant face. In 3 years, she had never felt as relieved as she did today. She leaned back into the leather seat, crossed her arms, and smiled with satisfaction. Finally, we got her out of the house. Sitting beside her, Madison, Liam's sister, let out a shrill laugh. "I told you, Mom. That girl seems harmless, but I bet she was after the family's money." Catherine smirked with superiority. "Wanting isn't the same as getting." She looked at her son, who was sitting in the passenger seat. "It's a good thing you were decisive and divorced her quickly." Liam said nothing, just stared out the window with a distant look. For some reason, he felt a strange emptiness inside him. It wasn't joy or relief, just a hollow feeling. 3 years ago, when he married Eleanor Vance, he thought their marriage would be simple, a quiet girl from a normal family who wouldn't cause any trouble. But 3 years later, it had all ended so fast that he hadn't even had time to figure out if he'd lost or gained anything. Suddenly, Catherine clapped her hands. "Oh, of course." She turned to the driver. "Take us directly to Atlantic Investment Bank." Madison was surprised. Why are we going to the bank, Mom? To access the money, of course. What else would it be for? She replied with a radiant smile, her voice filled with excitement. That $20 million has been sitting in the investment fund for 3 years. Today, with the divorce finalized, control comes back to us completely. She spoke as if she had just won a great battle. We need to confirm it now and put down a deposit on the mansion in the Hamptons. Madison's eyes widened. The $5 million one? Exactly, Catherine nodded firmly. It has the perfect location, a huge yard, and it's right near the golf club. When Liam gets married again, he needs to live somewhere that reflects his station. Hearing this, Liam frowned slightly. Mom, let's leave that for later. Catherine waved her hand dismissively. Later? Nonsense. A man needs to get married and have children quickly. She then lowered her voice as if discussing something obvious. This time, I'll choose well. She has to be from a good family. She smiled with disdain. Not some penniless nobody like the one we just left behind. The car pulled up in front of the imposing Atlantic Investment Bank building, a glass tower on Park Avenue. The three of them got out, and a doorman held the door for them. The inside of the bank was cool, with bright white light. Catherine went straight to the private banking desk. Good afternoon. I'd like to see the manager. For my investment account. The receptionist smiled politely. Of course, ma'am. Could I have your name? Catherine Harrison. Hearing the name, the employee nodded immediately. One moment, please, Mrs. Harrison. A few minutes later, a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a suit, came out to greet them. Mrs. Harrison, good afternoon. He shook her hand politely. I'm Mr. Daniels, your premium client manager. Catherine nodded. Let's go to your office. The three were led to a private meeting room. They were served tea, but Catherine didn't touch it. She placed her purse firmly on the table and got straight to the point. I'm here to confirm full control over the family's investment fund, she said in a confident voice. The $20 million. Mr. Daniels paused for a second. Ah, yes, the Harrison Group Fund. Exactly, Catherine nodded. My son and daughter-in-law divorced today. She smiled faintly. The binding clause has expired. Madison chimed in. Which means the money is now completely ours. Mr. Daniels looked at them for a few seconds with a slightly uncomfortable expression. I see. He turned on his computer and began typing softly. The room was silent for a moment, until he suddenly stopped, frowning slightly. Catherine frowned too. Is there a problem? Mr. Daniels looked at the screen for a few more seconds. Then he turned to them, his voice becoming very cautious. Excuse me. Could you wait one moment while I double-check? Catherine was getting impatient. Check what? We've been dealing with this for 3 years. Madison also lifted her chin. Exactly. You just need to confirm it. But Mr. Daniels stood up. Pardon me. I'll be right back. The door closed, and a strange silence filled the room. Catherine crossed her arms. Such a major bank, and so slow, Madison giggled. He probably got scared seeing such a large number, Mom. They both laughed. Only Liam remained silent. He looked around the luxurious glass-walled room, and a vague sense of unease began to creep over him. About 5 minutes later, the door opened. Mr. Daniels entered, but this time he was accompanied by another woman in her late 30s, dressed in a black skirt suit with a penetrating gaze. This is Miss Chen, our bank's legal counsel, Mr. Daniels said. At the word lawyer, Catherine was instantly annoyed. A lawyer? What for? Her voice turned sharp. I'm here to access my money, not file a complaint. Miss Chen sat down and opened a file in front of her. We just need to confirm certain information. She looked directly at Catherine. You just stated that your son finalized his divorce proceedings with Miss Eleanor Vance today, correct? Correct. It's official and effective. Correct, the lawyer nodded. Then she said a very soft sentence that seemed to freeze the air in the room. In that case, the asset protection clause has been activated. Catherine frowned. What clause? Miss Chen turned a page in the file. Clause number 7 of the investment fund contract. Her voice was clear. pronouncing each word carefully. In the event that Miss Eleanor Vance is forced to divorce or ceases to have a marital relationship with the Harrison family, the entirety of the fund will be immediately frozen and transferred under the representation of its original holder. The room fell silent. 1 second, 2, 3. Catherine let out a laugh. What are you talking about? Miss Chen closed the file, her gaze calm. She paused, then said with clarity that the $20 million are no longer under your family's control. The water glass on the table vibrated slightly. Madison jumped to her feet. What? Catherine slammed her hand on the table. Impossible. Miss Chen looked at them. I'm sorry. And then she delivered the final sentence. A sentence that left the entire Harrison family petrified. Because the person with the right to control that money from the beginning was not the Harrison Group. She paused, her gaze icy. But rather, Eleanor Vance. Liam was frozen. His ears were ringing. Only one thought crossed his mind. Impossible. Because for 3 years, he had always believed his wife was just a normal girl, a fragile woman, someone who had nothing. But if what the bank was saying was true, who really was the woman he had just divorced? The bank's VIP room fell into a sepulchral silence. There were no more laughs, no more airs of superiority, only a tension so thick you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Catherine Harrison was standing by the table, her hands pressed against the glass surface, her eyes wide as she stared at the lawyer, as if she'd just heard the most absurd thing in the world. What did you just say? Her voice trembled with rage. That the $20 million doesn't belong to my family? Miss Chen's expression didn't change. She simply pushed the file towards Catherine. You can read Clause 7 again. Catherine snatched the file and furiously flipped through the pages. With every line that appeared before her eyes, her face grew paler. Madison, beside her, also leaned in to look, and a few seconds later, she cried out, Impossible, pointing at the paper. It says right here that it's an investment fund of the Harrison Group. The lawyer nodded. Correct. The fund is in the name of the Harrison Group. She paused and continued. But the original capital belongs to another investor. The room fell silent again. A heavy silence. Liam, who was standing behind them, had his eyes fixed on the file. A shiver ran down his spine. Another investor? Miss Chen looked at him. Exactly. She opened another page. 3 years ago, when the Harrison Group was going through a severe financial crisis due to a failed real estate deal, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Hearing this, Liam clenched his fists. He remembered that time. 3 years ago, the company had almost collapsed. It was right when he married Eleanor Vance, but at the time, his father had told him he'd found a source of funding to save the company. And he never asked again, the lawyer continued. An investor contributed $20 million to save the company. She looked at them directly. That money was transferred into an investment fund under the Harrison Group's name. Madison immediately interjected. So that money is ours. The lawyer shook her head. It's a trust fund, she said slowly, word by word. The Harrison Group only had the right to use the capital to operate the business. The actual ownership rights have always belonged to the investor. The room remained silent for another few seconds. Then, Catherine slammed the table hard. And who is this investor? Miss Chen looked at her fixedly. The legal representative of that investment, she paused, then said with clarity, is Eleanor Vance. The sentence landed in the room like a thunderbolt. Madison took a step back. It can't be. Catherine was shaking her head over and over. No, impossible. Her voice was almost a scream. That girl is a penniless nobody. Her family doesn't have $20 million. The lawyer didn't react to her anger. She simply said calmly, that money doesn't belong to Miss Vance personally. She opened another folder. It's an investment from Vance Capital. Liam frowned. The name sounded very familiar. Suddenly, he remembered. Vance Capital, a massive investment fund that had bailed out many companies in the country, but which belonged to the Vance family, an extremely discreet clan. Liam stared at the lawyer. Are you saying, he swallowed hard, that Eleanor Vance is related to that fund? The lawyer nodded slightly. She is the legal heiress. The air in the room seemed to solidify. Catherine was petrified. Madison's jaw was hanging open. Only Liam remained still. But in his mind, hundreds of memories came flooding back. 3 years ago, when he met Eleanor, she was wearing a very simple white dress, with almost no makeup, and spoke softly. He had asked her, "What does your family do?" She had just smiled. "They have a small business." He didn't ask further, because at that moment, he thought she was the daughter of a middle-class family. But now, if what the bank said was true, the woman he had lived with for 3 years was, in fact, the heiress of a multi-million-dollar investment fund. Liam felt his heart pound. A vague sense of regret began to spread through his chest. Catherine still couldn't believe it. She lunged across the table, pointing at the lawyer. "I don't believe you," she almost shouted. "That girl was my daughter-in-law for 3 years. I know her better than anyone." The lawyer looked at her calmly. "You know her?" She smiled faintly. "If you really knew her," she said, sliding a paper in her direction, "perhaps you wouldn't have pushed her to divorce so quickly." Catherine looked at the paper. It was a copy of the investment contract. In the bottom corner was a small line of text, "Legal representative, Eleanor Vance." Her hands trembled, and the paper fell onto the table. Madison stammered. So the 20 million now?" The lawyer answered simply. "Has been frozen." And she added one more sentence, one that made the entire Harrison family feel like they were falling into an abyss. "And control has been transferred back to Miss Vance." Liam stood motionless. He felt his head spinning. Just an hour ago, he thought he had gotten rid of a meaningless marriage, but now he was beginning to understand something. The woman whose divorce he had just signed was likely the person who had silently saved his family's company 3 years ago. And Catherine, the woman who was roaring with laughter in front of the courthouse, was now completely sunk. She collapsed into a chair, muttering, "Impossible, impossible." But the truth was too clear. The 20 million not only didn't belong to the Harrison family, but it was now completely in the hands of the daughter-in-law they had just kicked out of their house. The bank's VIP room remained submerged in a suffocating silence. After the lawyer delivered her final sentence, no one said another word. All that could be heard was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the slight rustle of papers on the table. Catherine Harrison sat petrified in her chair, her face pale and her lips trembling, as if she wanted to say something but the words wouldn't come out. For over 20 years, she had grown accustomed to others obeying her, to money and power being in the hands of the Harrison family. But today, for the first time, she felt it all crumbling at her feet. She shook her head over and over. "It can't be." Madison, beside her, was equally terrified. "Liam, say something." But Liam remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the contract lying on the table. "Legal representative, Eleanor Vance." He read that name again and again, a name he had spoken every day for 3 years. A woman who had slept with him, eaten with him, lived with him. But now he realized he probably never truly knew her. Miss Chen closed her file. "We have finished informing you," she said calmly. "If you have no further questions, we will conclude this meeting." Madison immediately shouted, "Conclude what?" She pointed at the lawyer. "That 20 million is my family's company money. You can't just take it like that." The lawyer looked at her, unperturbed. "We are not taking it," she said slowly. "We are simply returning it to its owner." Madison was speechless. Catherine, on the other hand, jumped to her feet. The chair fell to the floor with a crash. "No!" she screamed. "That girl can't have the right to take my family's money." The lawyer sighed faintly. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, looking her in the eye, "perhaps you should remember something. 3 years ago, it was your own family that signed the contract, accepting this source of investment." She opened the file and pointed to a signature. "This is your husband's signature." Catherine looked down. Her husband's familiar signature, Mr. Harrison, was clearly stamped on the paper. That day, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. No one dared to invest, no one wanted to help. Suddenly, a secret investment fund appeared with $20 million, a sum large enough to save the entire company. The Harrison family was so euphoric at the time that they paid no attention to the complex clauses of the contract as long as the company survived. But they didn't know that this investment fund had a special condition, one that only 3 people knew: The bank, the lawyer, and Eleanor Vance. The lawyer stood up. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said in a low voice. "But from now on, your family no longer has the right to use these funds." With that, she left the room. The door closed, and the office fell silent again. A heavy, oppressive silence. Madison turned to her mother. "Mom, what now?" Catherine didn't answer. Her eyes were vacant. A moment later, she stood up abruptly. "Let's go," she said in an icy voice. "Let's find her." Liam looked up. "You mean Eleanor Vance?" "Yes," Catherine said, gritting her teeth. "She can't have gone far." She grabbed her purse tightly. "She has to explain this." Madison nodded repeatedly. "That's right, Mom. I bet she's been hiding this for 3 years." But Liam remained quiet. He said nothing, just looked through the glass. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to fade. A sudden memory surfaced in his mind. 3 years ago, on the day he proposed to Eleanor, she had asked him only one question: "Are you sure you want to marry me?" He had laughed. "Why wouldn't I be?" She was silent for a few seconds and then said, "If one day you find out I'm not who you think I am, will you regret it?" At the time, he didn't understand the question, just laughed and said, "As long as I have you, that's all that matters." But now, Liam felt a lump in his throat. Perhaps the person who regretted it most at this moment was him. Catherine turned to him. "Liam, what are you doing just standing there? Let's go find her." Liam nodded slowly. The three of them hurried out of the bank. The Maybach was once again navigating the busy streets, but this time there were no laughs or satisfaction, only panic, because they had just realized something. The daughter-in-law they had scorned for 3 years might be the person who held the fate of the entire Harrison family in her hands. But when the car returned to the courthouse, Eleanor Vance was gone. The coffee shop across the street was empty. No one knew where she had gone. No one knew what she was going to do next. Only one thing was certain. From that moment on, the game had completely changed, and the one holding all the cards was no longer the Harrison family. The Maybach screeched to a halt in front of the courthouse, and the door flew open. Catherine Harrison was almost the first one out. Her face no longer held any trace of its usual arrogance. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes were filled with panic. "Where is that girl?" She looked around. The courthouse area was still crowded, but Eleanor Vance was gone. Madison ran to the coffee shop across the street, pushed open the door, and scanned the place. "Excuse me, there was a young woman sitting here a little while ago, in a white blouse." The waiter nodded. "Yes. And where is she?" "She already left." Madison turned abruptly to look at her mother. "She's gone." Catherine froze. "Where to?" The waiter shook his head. "I don't know." "She got a call and left." Catherine clenched her fists. Liam, behind them, said nothing. He looked at the empty chair by the window. The glass of iced water on the table wasn't finished. The ice had almost melted, which indicated she had left very recently. A strange sense of emptiness washed over him. In 3 years of living together, he had never paid real attention to her. He had never asked her what she liked to drink or where she liked to sit. But at this moment, seeing that empty chair, he felt as if he had just lost something very important. Catherine turned to her son. "Liam, what are you doing standing there? Call her." Liam took out his phone. His fingers trembled slightly. He searched for Eleanor's number in his contacts. For 3 years, that name had always been at the top of the list, but today he felt like he was calling a complete stranger. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then, "The number you have dialed is not available at this time." The cold voice of the automated operator echoed. Liam hung up. Madison got angry. I bet she turned off her phone. Catherine gritted her teeth. That girl hid everything from the beginning. She turned to Liam. "Have someone look into her, right now." Liam was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Okay." An hour later, in the Harrison Group's office, Liam was sitting at his desk. On his computer screen was a series of newly arrived documents. Beside him stood Richard, his trusted assistant. Richard placed a folder on the desk. "Mr. Harrison," his voice sounded hesitant. "I did a preliminary investigation on Miss Vance." Liam looked up, and Richard took a deep breath. "There are some rather surprising things." Catherine immediately approached, surprising how. Richard opened the folder. The first page showed a large title, Vance Capital. Catherine frowned. What is this? Richard looked at her. It's one of the largest investment funds in the United States. Madison scoffed. So, Richard turned to the next page. In the center was a photo of an older man in a suit, with a stern face. Below the photo, it read, Arthur Vance, founder of Vance Capital. Liam stared at the photo. Suddenly, he remembered that 3 years ago, on his wedding day, an older man had been present. He had stood at a distance, watching Eleanor for a long time. Then, he shook Liam's hand and said, Take good care of her. At the time, he thought he was just a distant relative, but now... Richard turned to the next page. Arthur Vance has one granddaughter. He placed his finger on the next photo. Liam leaned in to look. The photo was of Eleanor. She was standing in the middle of a business conference with the Vance Capital logo behind her. Liam shot up from his chair. What? Richard said slowly. Miss Vance is the sole heiress of Vance Capital. The entire room fell silent. Madison stammered, That can't be. In the 3 years she was our sister-in-law, she even went to the market and cooked herself. Richard sighed. Perhaps she did it on purpose. Liam felt his head spin. 3 years. For 3 years, he had allowed the heiress of a multi-hundred-million-dollar investment fund to cook for him, clean the house, and endure his mother's contempt. A heavy sense of regret crushed his chest. Catherine still didn't believe it. She snatched the folder. Impossible. But when she reached the last page, she froze. There was a copy of the inheritance documents. Name of heiress, Eleanor Vance. Estimated net worth, over $300 million. Her hands trembled, and the folder fell to the floor. Madison stammered. So, for 3 years, we treated a $300 million heiress like a maid. No one answered. Only Liam remained standing. Silent. In his mind, there was only one thought. He had just divorced the woman who could have completely changed his life. And what was worse, he had probably been the one who pushed her away. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a black Maybach pulled up in front of a skyscraper. The door opened, and Eleanor Vance stepped out. A man in a suit bowed respectfully. Good afternoon, Miss Eleanor. Eleanor nodded slightly. Is everything ready? The man smiled. Yes, of course. He handed her a folder. The Harrison Group is about to enter a difficult phase. Eleanor looked at the building in front of her with a calm gaze. 3 years as a daughter-in-law, 3 years of patience. She had never thought of revenge, but some people only understand the value of what they had when they lose everything. She said in a low voice, This is just the beginning. The next morning, the Harrison Group headquarters was in chaos. Accountants rushed back and forth. Phones rang off the hook, and department heads crowded in front of the conference room with worried faces. In the director's office, Liam was sitting in front of his computer, where a series of emails showed red alerts. He read each line, his face darkening with every moment. Suddenly, the door burst open. His assistant, Richard, entered with a grimmer expression than ever. Mr. Harrison, his voice was hoarse. We have a problem. Liam looked up. What is it? Richard placed a folder on the desk. Atlantic Investment Bank just notified us that our $10 million line of credit has been suspended. Liam frowned. The reason? Richard took a deep breath. Because the $20 million investment fund has been frozen. The room fell silent. 1 second. 2. 3. Liam clenched his fists. They suspend our credit just for that? Richard shook his head. That's not all. He opened another email. Bank of the West has also announced the suspension of our financing line, and 3 of our real estate partners have sent letters demanding early payment of their debts. Liam shot to his feet. What? Richard looked at him. Sir, you know, for the past 3 years, a large part of the company's cash flow has depended on that $20 million fund. Now that the right to use it has been revoked, he paused. The entire financial system of the Harrison Group is starting to collapse. That sentence was like a hammer blow. Liam stood motionless. He had never thought the situation was this serious. In the last 3 years, The company had grown very quickly, with projects constantly expanding, but now he realized that it was all built on a foundation he had never fully understood. $20 million. A sum his family had always believed was theirs, but which was actually just a temporary investment. Richard said in a low voice. If we can't secure a new source of financing in 2 months, he didn't finish the sentence. But Liam understood. The company could go bankrupt. Meanwhile, at the Harrison family mansion, Catherine Harrison was pacing back and forth in the living room. On the table was a pile of papers, and her phone had just ended a call. "What?" she yelled. "You're not lending us any more money either." Someone said something on the other end of the line, and she got even angrier. "We've been doing business for 10 years. You can't turn your backs on us now." But a few seconds later, she slammed the phone down. They had hung up on her. Madison was sitting on the couch, pale. "Mom? What's going on?" Catherine didn't answer. She collapsed onto the couch, her forehead beaded with sweat. In 20 years, she had never seen a situation this bad. Before, whenever the company had difficulties, there was always the investment fund to help. But now that source of money was gone. Madison said in a trembling voice, "Mom, is it because of Eleanor?" Catherine gritted her teeth. Who else could it be? She slammed the table. That girl did this on purpose. But as she said it, she fell silent. A terrifying thought crossed her mind. If Eleanor knew everything from the beginning, why had she endured 3 years in the Harrison house? A shiver ran down her spine. That evening, Liam arrived home very late. He walked into the living room. Catherine immediately stood up. "How is the company?" Liam loosened his tie. "Bad," just one word, but it was enough to make Catherine's face turn pale. Madison asked worriedly, "Is it very serious?" Liam looked at them both and said bluntly, "If we don't get additional capital in 2 months, the company will go bankrupt." The room froze. "Impossible," Madison said, frightened. Catherine asked in a trembling voice, "So, what do we do now?" Liam was silent. A moment later, he said, "There's only one option left." His mother and sister looked at him. "What option?" Liam lowered his gaze to the table and said in a grave voice, "Find Eleanor." Madison immediately objected. Why look for her? But Catherine was silent because she understood that if the investment fund belonged to Eleanor, the only person who could save the company was her. She clasped her hands. A woman as proud as her had never thought the day would come when she would have to beg her ex-daughter-in-law. But now, she might have no other choice. That night, in a luxurious office building in the city center, Eleanor was standing in front of a large window. At her feet, the city lights twinkled. The man standing behind her said in a low voice, "Miss Eleanor, the Harrison Group has begun its crisis." Eleanor didn't turn around, just watched the flow of traffic on the street below. 3 years ago, she had entered the Harrison family hoping for a quiet life, but 3 years later, she left with a completely changed heart. The man asked, "Should we continue?" Eleanor smiled faintly, a serene smile. "It's not necessary," she said in a low voice. "We just need to stay still, and they will crumble on their own." Meanwhile, in the Harrison mansion, Catherine was sitting in the dark living room. She stared at her phone. Finally, with trembling hands, she dialed a number. A number she had never thought she would call in 3 years. On the other end of the line, Eleanor Vance's phone began to ring. That night, the lights were on in the Harrison family mansion, but the atmosphere was no longer warm. The large, luxurious living room, with its imported designer sofa, felt strangely cold. Catherine Harrison sat alone with her phone in front of her. The screen remained lit, displaying a name she had never called on her own initiative in 3 years, Eleanor Vance. She stared at that name for a long time. During her 3 years as a daughter-in-law, Eleanor was always the first to call her, to ask if she needed anything, what she wanted for dinner, or if she had a doctor's appointment, but she had never responded kindly. In her eyes, Eleanor was just a girl from a humble family who had gotten lucky enough to marry her son. A woman without children, without status, without value. Now, that same woman held in her hands $20 million that could decide the future of the Harrison Group. She gripped the phone tightly, feeling a lump in her throat. Catherine never thought the day would come when she would have to beg her ex-daughter-in-law, but if she didn't, the company could go under. Liam stood by the window, silently looking out. Madison paced back and forth in the room. The tension was so thick that no one dared to speak above a whisper. Finally, Catherine pressed the call button. The phone rang once, then again, and with each passing second, her heart beat faster. Liam said nothing, just stared at the phone in his mother's hand. The ringing suddenly stopped. The call was answered. A familiar voice, calm and soft, said, "Hello?" The room fell silent. In 3 years, they had heard that voice thousands of times, but it had never sounded so distant. Catherine was speechless for a few seconds, not knowing how to begin. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor said again. Her voice remained polite, but the former closeness was gone. There was a clear distance. Catherine took a deep breath. "Eleanor," she called her by name, a name she had always pronounced coldly before, but this time her voice was lower. "Where are you?" On the other end, there was a brief silence before Eleanor simply replied, "Is something the matter?" Catherine clasped her hands. "The company is having some problems." Madison's eyes widened. She had never heard her mother speak to Eleanor so gently, but Eleanor's voice remained impassive. "And what does that have to do with me?" A simple question that left Catherine speechless. For 3 years, Eleanor had always said our house, our company, but today she just said your company, drawing a clear dividing line. Catherine tried to stay calm. "Eleanor, about the investment fund, could you meet with me for a moment?" On the other end, there was another silence before Eleanor asked, "What for?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. A proud woman like her was not used to having to give explanations, but this time she was forced to say, "We need to talk." After a long pause, Eleanor replied, "All right, just one word." "Where?" Catherine asked, relieved. "Tomorrow, at the house." But Eleanor immediately interrupted her. "No." Catherine stopped. "Then where do you want to meet?" Eleanor's answer was clear. "At my office." That sentence left everyone in the room silent. At my office. 3 simple words that reminded them of something. Eleanor was no longer the Harrison family's daughter-in-law. She didn't have to enter that house, obey their orders, or bow her head to anyone. "I'll send you the address tomorrow," Eleanor said. She paused, and with the same calm voice, added, "But before we meet, I want to make one thing clear." Catherine felt a knot in her stomach. "What's that?" "You don't need to give explanations, nor do you need to apologize," Eleanor said slowly. That sentence surprised Catherine, but the next one was what truly sent a chill down their spines, "Because I have no intention of coming back." With that, the call ended. The short beep echoed in the room. Catherine was still holding the phone. "Mom, what did she mean by that?" Madison asked in a trembling voice. Liam looked at the floor. An indescribable feeling washed over him. Not just worry for the company, but also deep regret. Because for the first time, he realized something. The woman he had always considered weak had, in reality, never needed the Harrison family. And now, it was probably they who needed her. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the Vance Capitol building, Eleanor hung up the phone. Her assistant, standing beside her, asked, "Miss Eleanor, are they coming tomorrow?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes." The assistant hesitated for a moment. "Are you planning to help them?" Eleanor looked out the window. Below, the city continued to sparkle. 3 years ago, she thought the Harrison family would be her home forever. But now it all seemed like a dream she had already woken up from. She said in a low voice, "Whether I'll help them or not, they'll find out tomorrow." The next morning, the sky over New York City was unusually clear. The first rays of sun reflected off the skyscrapers, making their glass facades shine like giant mirrors. In front of the Vance Capitol building, a black Maybach pulled up. The door opened, and Catherine Harrison was the first to step out. She looked up at the imposing building, over 30 stories tall. At the top, large, gleaming steel letters read, "Vance Capitol." Catherine swallowed hard. In 3 years, she had never heard Eleanor mention this place. If it weren't for the previous day's investigation, she would still think her ex-daughter-in-law was just an ordinary girl. Madison got out next, staring at the luxurious lobby with wide eyes. The polished marble floors, the The high ceilings with enormous crystal chandeliers, the employees in suits walking quickly but orderly. This place was a world away from any of the Harrison Group's offices. Liam was the last to get out. He looked up at the building, and a strange feeling washed over him. 3 years. 3 years of living with Eleanor, and he never knew she belonged to a world like this. The three of them entered the lobby. The receptionist immediately bowed. "Good morning. How may I help you?" "We have a meeting with Eleanor Vance," Catherine said. The receptionist smiled. "Yes, Miss Eleanor informed us. Please go up to the 28th floor." The term Miss Eleanor made Catherine feel uncomfortable. The elevator doors opened, and the three of them stepped inside. No one spoke. Only the soft hum of the machine could be heard. "Mom, do you think she'll help us?" Madison whispered. Catherine didn't answer. She didn't know either. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto a long hallway with a gray carpet. On both sides were glass-walled offices. At the end of the hall, a large door with a plaque that read, "Executive Office." An assistant was waiting for them. "This way, please." The door opened, and the three of them entered. The office was enormous, flooded with natural light pouring in from a wall of glass. In the center, a large desk, and sitting behind it was Eleanor Vance. She was wearing a simple cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back, and her expression was serene. She no longer had the docile, resigned look she wore when she lived with them, but rather the calm of someone accustomed to power. Liam froze for a moment. He almost didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Eleanor looked at them with absolute calm. "Have a seat," she said, in a soft but firm voice. The three of them sat down. No one spoke first. Finally, it was Catherine who broke the silence. "Eleanor," her voice was hoarse. "Are you well?" A question so simple that Madison almost laughed at how strange it sounded. In 3 years, she had never asked her that. Eleanor simply replied, "I'm fine." She no longer called her mom. It was just a polite response. Catherine bit her lip. "Eleanor, about the company." Before she could finish, Eleanor gently placed a folder on the table. "This is the Harrison Group's financial report." Catherine stopped short. You already knew?" "I've known for a while," Eleanor said, looking at her. Liam frowned. "For a while?" Eleanor nodded. From the moment the fund's blocking clause was activated, she opened a page of the document. Currently, the Harrison Group is short about $15 million to maintain its liquidity. Madison's eyes widened. "You knew everything." Eleanor smiled faintly. "All the banks are my partners." That sentence left them silent. "Eleanor, can you help the company?" Catherine asked. It was a phrase she never thought she'd have to say in 20 years, asking for help, but Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked out the window for a moment, then said, "I could help." The three of them looked at her immediately. Madison almost sighed with relief, but Eleanor's next sentence froze them. "But I have one condition." "What condition?" Catherine hurried to ask. Eleanor turned to look at them. "The Harrison Group must be sold to Vance Capital." The room fell silent. 1 second. 2. 3. "What?" Madison jumped up. Catherine turned pale. "You want to buy the company?" Eleanor nodded. "Exactly," she said, with complete naturalness. "In exchange, I'll inject the capital to save it." Liam looked at her. In his eyes, there was no longer anger, only a vague pain. And then, Eleanor looked directly at him and gave him a very simple answer. "After that, you will be just an employee." The sentence landed in the room like a stab wound. The man who had been her husband, who had been the vice president of the Harrison Group, would now be just an employee. "Never," Catherine shouted, getting to her feet. "That is my family's company." But Eleanor just looked at her calmly. "You can refuse." She closed the folder. "But in 2 months, the company will go bankrupt." The room plunged into silence because, for the first time, the Harrison family realized something. The power to decide was no longer in their hands. In the spacious executive office of Vance Capital, the atmosphere was so heavy, one could barely breathe. The morning light streamed through the large window, illuminating the desk where Eleanor Vance sat. She remained calm, a stark contrast to the three people in front of her. Catherine Harrison was still on her feet, paralyzed after Eleanor's last sentence. Never. That company belongs to my family. Eleanor didn't react. She simply looked at her with a serenity that infuriated Catherine even more. Madison turned to Liam. Say something. But Liam remained seated, his hands on the table, his gaze lost in the file. His mind was in chaos. He understood perfectly that what Eleanor was saying could happen, because at that moment, his family had no other source of financing. If Vance Capital didn't intervene, the Harrison Group would sink. Catherine turned to Eleanor, her eyes full of rage. You're doing this for revenge, aren't you? Eleanor frowned slightly. Revenge? She repeated, as if pondering the word. A moment later, she shook her head. No, she said in a low voice. I'm just doing business. The answer left Catherine speechless. 3 years earlier, the Harrison family had accepted the $20 million investment as a business deal, but they never imagined that one day the tables would be turned. Madison stood up. Don't lie. You're doing this because you hate my mother. Eleanor looked at her without anger, only with an icy calm. Is that what you think? Isn't it? Madison said, crossing her arms. 3 years in my house playing the weakling, and now you show your true colors. That sentence silenced the room. Eleanor looked at Madison for a few seconds, and then slowly stood up. She walked over to the large window, the city stretching out at her feet. 3 years. 3 years as the Harrisons' daughter-in-law. The memories flooded her mind. The dinners where she cleared the table while the rest of the family remained seated. The times Catherine criticized her in front of relatives. The nights she spent alone in her room, while Liam came home late without notice. And all the times they treated her like a stranger in what was supposed to be her home. Eleanor turned around for the first time. Her eyes showed a hint of emotion. Do you know why I never said anything for 3 years? No one answered. Because I believed that family was a place where people could change, that if I was patient enough, things would get better. She smiled, but it was a bitter smile. But I was wrong. The room fell silent. Catherine was still standing, but her gaze had begun to waver. Eleanor looked at her directly. Do you remember the day I joined the Harrison family? Catherine said nothing. Eleanor continued. That day, you said something to me. She paused and repeated it word for word. In this house, from the chair you sit on to the glass you drink from, everything is Harrison family money. Madison froze. It was true that her mother had said it, but they never thought Eleanor would remember. I remember it perfectly, Eleanor nodded. For 3 years, I always remembered that sentence. She approached the table and placed her hand on the file. So today, you must also understand something. She looked at them, her voice calm but firm. In business, there are no feelings, only value. The atmosphere grew even heavier. Eleanor, do you really want to see the company go under? Catherine asked, in a trembling voice. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She looked at her, and a moment later said, I've already given you an option. Catherine bit her lip, her hands shaking. In her entire life, she had never knelt before anyone. But now, the family company, her husband's prestige, her son's career, everything was in the hands of the woman before her. 1 second, 2, 3, and then something happened that no one expected. Catherine Harrison knelt. Mom! Madison screamed. Liam also jumped to his feet. Mom! But Catherine remained on her knees. Tears fell to the floor. Her voice trembled. Eleanor, my dear, I'm begging you. The room fell silent. In 3 years, that woman had never called Eleanor dear. But today she did, to plead with her to save the company, to save her family. Please consider that I was wrong, she said, lowering her head. Liam was motionless. He had never seen his mother so vulnerable. And Eleanor, she just stood there, looking at the woman who had despised her for 3 years, kneeling at her feet. Her eyes showed no satisfaction, only a deep calm. She said in a very low voice, Get up, Mrs. Harrison. Catherine shook her head. If you don't help us, I won't get up. The room was silent. Then, Eleanor said something that stunned them all. You don't need to kneel. She looked at them, her voice soft but clear. I've already told you I will save the company. The 3 of them looked up, but her next sentence was what truly took their breath away. but the condition remains. The Harrison Group must be sold to Vance Capital. The room plunged back into silence, because they understood that this time, Eleanor was no longer their daughter-in-law. She was the person who decided their fate. The Vance Capital executive office remained shrouded in a heavy atmosphere. Catherine Harrison was still kneeling on the floor, her hands trembling, her eyes red with tears. Madison, behind her, was completely paralyzed. She had never seen her mother so weak. Liam, for his part, remained standing, watching his mother kneel before the woman who was once his wife, with a sense of discomfort and pain in his chest. Eleanor remained behind her desk. Her gaze towards Catherine reflected neither anger nor satisfaction, only a calm that made it impossible to guess her thoughts. "Get up, Mrs. Harrison," she said in a low voice. "If you don't help us, I won't get up," Catherine insisted. "My dear, please." Liam approached. "Mom, get up." He took her arm, but she resisted. "Eleanor, I'm begging you." The room fell silent. A long time later, Eleanor sighed faintly, walked around the desk, and approached Catherine. She bent down and took her hand. "Get up," she said in a voice so soft yet firm that it made Catherine raise her head. Their gazes met. In 3 years as a daughter-in-law, it was the first time they had looked at each other so intently. Finally, Catherine stood up, trembling, and sat in the chair, her hands still shaking. Eleanor returned to her desk and opened the folder. "My condition remains the same. Vance Capital will buy the Harrison Group. In return, I will inject the capital to save the company." "You're shameless," Madison exclaimed angrily. "We humiliate ourselves like this, and you still stick to the same thing." But Liam raised a hand to stop his sister. "Madison, that's enough." Madison froze. Her brother's voice was different. Not angry, but like someone who had understood something. Liam looked at Eleanor for a long time. Countless memories surfaced in his mind. Their wedding day, 3 years earlier. Eleanor wore a simple white dress and smiled faintly beside him. After the ceremony, she asked him, "Do you regret it?" He had laughed and replied, "I only fear that you'll regret it." But now, the one who regretted it most was him. Liam approached the desk. "I want to ask you something." Eleanor looked at him. "Go ahead." Liam took a deep breath. "In these 3 years, why didn't you tell the truth?" The question silenced the room. Eleanor looked at him and, a moment later, replied, "Do you think if I had, anything would have been different?" Liam was speechless because deep down, he knew that everything probably would have been the same. The problem was never the money, but how they had treated her. He clenched his fists and said something he had never said in 3 years. "I'm sorry." The room went cold. Madison looked at him in disbelief. Catherine also looked up, because Liam never apologized to anyone. But this time, he lowered his head. "I'm sorry," he repeated in a grave voice. "Because in 3 years, I was never on your side." Eleanor looked at him, and her eyes wavered for an instant before returning to their calm. "That doesn't matter anymore. Maybe not to you, but it does to me," Liam said with a bitter smile. He looked around. "I thought the divorce was a liberation." He paused and continued. "But now I understand that the biggest fool in this marriage was me." The sentence left Madison speechless, and Catherine lowered her head. She knew that if she hadn't pushed her son to divorce, maybe things would have been different. Eleanor closed the folder. "Let's get back to the company. My time is limited." "I agree," Liam said, looking at her. The room was stunned. "Liam," Madison exclaimed, but he continued. "I agree to sell the Harrison Group to Vance Capital." Catherine also looked up. "We have no other choice, Mom," he said, turning to her. Then he looked at Eleanor. "But I have one request." Eleanor frowned. "What request?" "After the acquisition, let me continue working there," Liam said with a faint smile. "Not as vice president. I'm content to be an employee." The room fell silent. Eleanor looked at him for a long time and then said something that surprised everyone. "You don't have to be an employee." Liam stopped. "What do you mean?" "When Vance Capital takes control, I'll need someone who knows the company inside and out," Eleanor said. And she added, "You will continue as the general manager." Liam was stunned. "You trust me?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "No," she said bluntly. I only trust your ability. A very practical, but also very clear answer. Liam stood motionless, with a mix of indescribable emotions. Perhaps it was the first time he truly understood the woman in front of him, but unfortunately, it was already too late. The story, however, was not over yet, because after Vance Capital acquired the Harrison Group, another secret of the Harrison family was about to come to light. A secret that might surprise everyone much more than the $20 million. After the meeting at Vance Capital, the tension in the room began to ease, although the atmosphere remained heavy. On the desk, the transfer contract for the Harrison Group lay ready, waiting for a signature to change everything. Liam sat across from Eleanor, staring at the paper for a long time. 3 years ago, he had signed their marriage certificate with her. 3 years later, he was signing a contract that would completely change the future of his company. He picked up the pen, but before signing, he asked, "Can I ask you one last question?" Eleanor looked up. "Go ahead." During these 3 years, Liam asked, looking her in the eyes, "Did you ever truly love me?" The question silenced the room. Madison, behind him, frowned. Catherine also looked up, but Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked out the large window. Below, the city continued to bustle with incessant traffic. A moment later, she said, "Yes." Just one word, but it left Liam paralyzed. "The day you proposed to me, I was very happy," she continued. A fleeting memory appeared in her eyes. That day, he stood at her doorstep with a huge bouquet of flowers. He told her, "I'm not as rich as others, but I'll work hard to give you a good life." She believed him. She believed that if they both worked hard, everything would be fine. But, Eleanor sighed, love can't survive on its own. She looked at him. "In 3 years, you were never on my side." Liam lowered his head. He couldn't deny it, because it was the truth. Many times, he had heard his mother say cruel things to Eleanor, but he had always chosen silence. He thought that if he didn't make a big deal of it, it would all pass. But he didn't understand that his silence was what hurt her the most. "There's something I never told anyone," Eleanor continued. She opened a drawer, took out an envelope, and placed it on the table. "Look." Liam took it. Inside was a medical report. He opened it, and a few seconds later, his hands began to tremble, because on the paper it clearly read, "Test result, 6 weeks pregnant." Liam looked up, his voice breaking. You were pregnant?" The room froze. Madison's jaw dropped, and Catherine was petrified. For 3 years, the family had thought Eleanor couldn't have children because she had never gotten pregnant. But the paper in Liam's hand proved otherwise. "When was this?" Liam asked in a trembling voice. "In our 2nd year of marriage," Eleanor replied in a low voice. A painful memory crossed her eyes. That day, she found out she was pregnant. She was so happy she wanted to tell Liam. But at that very moment, she overheard a conversation between Catherine and some relatives in the living room. "If that girl has a child, we'll have to split the inheritance with her." That sentence was like a stab wound. At that moment, Eleanor understood that to her mother-in-law, her unborn grandchild was just a threat to the family fortune. "And the baby?" Liam asked, clutching the paper. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes calm, but her voice trembled slightly. "I lost it." The room fell silent. "Impossible," Madison whispered, but Eleanor continued. "That day, I heard what you said," she said, looking at Catherine without resentment or anger, just with a deep gaze. "That night, I had a hemorrhage. The doctor said it was due to extreme stress." She paused. "After that, I couldn't get pregnant again." The paper fell from Liam's hands. He was paralyzed, as if all his strength had been drained. For 3 years, he had thought his wife didn't want to have children, but now he knew she had been pregnant, and he never knew. Liam took a step back. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said in a hoarse voice. Eleanor looked at him with a sad smile. "Do you think you would have believed me?" Liam couldn't answer, because he knew that at that moment, he probably would have thought the same as his mother, that she was lying. The room was silent for a long time. Finally, Eleanor closed the folder. "That's in the past," she said in a low voice. "Let's get back to the company." But Liam was still there, his hands trembling. In his mind, there was only one thought. If he had been on her side that day, maybe his child would still be alive, and his marriage probably wouldn't have ended. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise. A new day was beginning. But for the Harrison family, this was just the beginning of the truth. After the truth about the baby was revealed, the Vance Capital Executive Office plunged into a silence heavier than ever. No one spoke. No one dared to look at each other. All that could be heard was the soft whistle of the wind against the glass. Liam remained motionless, his hands on the table, his gaze fixed on the crumpled report he held tightly. In his mind, there was only one thought. He had lost a child without knowing. For 3 years, he believed Eleanor didn't want to be a mother. He had even once said something to her that he was now ashamed of. If you don't want to have kids, just say so. But the truth was, she had been pregnant, and their baby had left in solitude, with no one by its side. Liam took a step back. "I didn't know," he said in a hoarse voice. No one answered. He looked at Eleanor. Her eyes remained calm, but that calm hurt him more than any reprimand. "I really didn't know," he repeated. "I know." Eleanor nodded. 2 words, without resentment, without reprimands. And that's what hurt Liam the most. Because when a wound stops hurting, it's because there's no hope left. On the other side, Catherine Harrison collapsed into her chair, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. "My God," she whispered. "It was my fault." 3 years ago, she was the one who had spoken those words. She was the one who had pressured Eleanor, and now she understood that her own words might have caused the loss of her unborn grandchild. She burst into tears for the first time in many years. That strong woman cried like a guilty person. "Eleanor, I was wrong," she said, lowering her head. "It was my fault." But Eleanor stood there, not approaching, not comforting her, in silence. Because some apologies, no matter how sincere, cannot change the past. A moment later, Eleanor closed the folder. "That's in the past," she said in a low voice. "Let's get back to the company." A sentence so practical that it surprised everyone. But that's who she was now. She pushed the contract toward Liam. "Sign." Liam looked at the paper, then at her. A moment later, he picked up the pen and signed. With a single signature, the Harrison Group officially became the property of Vance Capital. But strangely, no one felt it as a defeat. At least the company had been saved. After signing, Liam put down the pen. He looked at Eleanor one last time. "Thank you." Eleanor didn't answer. "Not for the company," he continued, "but for giving me the chance to amend my mistakes." Eleanor looked at him and said in a low voice, "You don't owe me anything. What we had is over." A simple sentence that closed a chapter forever. Liam nodded. He understood that some things, once lost, can never be recovered. A month later, the Harrison Group officially became a subsidiary of Vance Capital. Under the new management, the company stabilized. Liam continued as general manager, but now he worked in a completely different way, without arrogance, without complacency. He learned to listen to his employees, to take responsibility, to be a real man. Catherine, after everything that happened, also changed a lot. She sold the mansion and moved into a smaller house. There were no more lavish parties or ostentation, just an older woman learning to live with humility. Madison went abroad to continue her studies. The Harrison family no longer had its former shine, but at least they had learned to value what they once despised. And Eleanor Vance, one afternoon, stood on the terrace of the Vance Capitol building. The wind stirred her hair as the city buzzed at her feet. Her assistant approached. "Miss Eleanor, the Harrison Group is now stable." Eleanor nodded. "Do you regret anything?" the assistant asked. Eleanor looked out at the city, and a moment later, she shook her head. No, because in those 3 years, she had learned a lesson. Some people come into our lives to bring us happiness, and others come only to teach us how to grow. The Harrison family was her greatest lesson, but after everything, she no longer felt resentment, only a deep peace. Eleanor smiled faintly.